Hey, welcome back everybody. Nicholas Dingle here again for another VB.NET 2013 video. Alright, in this video we're going to have a look at sequential files, also known as text files, and how to write to them. Okay, I'm also going to do a second part of this video, which is how to read from files, which is a little bit more involved. Okay, writing to files I find is much easier than reading from them. Now, I think the first question I should probably answer is, why do we have files in the first place? Well, I can actually explain that example with just a simple use of Microsoft Word. Okay, let's say for example I've spent the last 5 hours typing up a document, which is awesome. Why not? And I want to make sure that when I save this document, that the next day I walk in, this document is here for me to open up, edit, print, copy, do whatever. Okay, when I go to save this document, let's just pop it on my desktop for example's sake, my awesome document, and I close Word. Really what I've done is I've created a file, and Word has put all the information or everything that I've done in Word inside that file. I haven't saved Word the program, I've just saved everything I've typed inside my file. Okay, if I actually right click on this and go edit with Notepad++, we can actually see the guts of this file. So if I quickly have a look at it, this is what a document looks like on the inside. All right. Now, obviously you can't understand that, but the person who can understand that is Microsoft Word. So basically, this file has nothing to do with Microsoft Word. It's just Microsoft Word can read it effectively and reinstitute all this information. So let's say, for example's sake, well, what I'm effectively doing is saving the state of Microsoft Word, and opening that file restores the state of that document that I was working on. Okay, another example of saving state, as it's called, is if you're playing a game and you're halfway through a level, but you have to go and clean your bedroom for whatever reason, because it's dirty as hell, then you would save your game. And what you're doing by saving your game, the game isn't saving everything you see in front of you. What it's doing is it's saving the state of the game. And for a game, that might be the position of the player, how much health you have left, where the enemies are around you, how much health they have, things like that. It saves the state of your game into a file so that when you reload your game, it can remember all those things that you're up to. It can remember the position of your player, how much health you had left, how many bullets you had in your gun, and how many guns you had, things like that. Okay, so it's actually up to you to figure out how you save to files and how you read from them. Okay, as you get more and more used to files, you can do more and more complex things. But for the moment, we're going to do some really basic stuff. All we're going to do is just write some stuff into a file, and then we're just going to, at the end, open it all up and read the guts of it. So we're just going to do plain text for the moment, nothing special. So the first thing I like to talk about is just the process of working with files. So what is the process? There are 3 steps. Step the first is open the bloody file. Second step is, I like to call it, do your stuff. Third step is close the bloody file. Alright, so effectively, if you were going to read a book, before you could read the book, you have to open it. And then you would start reading all the text and enjoy it, hopefully enjoy it. And then finally, when you put the book away, you'd close it. So basically, this is the same process that we need to do with files. If you forget to close your file, it might get to the point where you have to reboot your operating system because the file's still open and it's locked. Okay, and I will get to what that might look like very soon. So when you're working with files, okay, you're going to use 3 main commands for writing to them. Okay, the first one is, wrong way around, file open. I'll explain what goes in the brackets soon. Okay, you will then use print line to write stuff to the file, and you will use file close. So those are effectively our 3 steps. 1, 2, 3. Alright. Now let's have a look at some of the things that have to go in this brackets. There's actually a fair few. Now, something I've never explained before, you may know that these are parameters by now. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different parameters. But you may notice these square brackets around these parameters. That means I don't actually have to access or use them. So effectively, I only need to use 1, 2, 3 parameters at this point. It's asking me for a file number. Now, what is a file number? Essentially, in Visual Basic, you assign a file a number, and then you use that number to interact with the file for the rest of the program. All right. So let's say, for example, I just picked the number 1 to start with. It must be the number 1 all the way up to, I think, 65,000. Okay. But you must make sure if you're working with a couple of files at the same time, let's say you've got 2 files open, you need to make sure that you have different file numbers. Otherwise, you're going to have a runtime error. So the first file, call it number 1. Second file, call it number 2. And later on, I'll show you another way to ensure you never have that problem. Okay, so for the moment, just remember the file number is 1. If I press comma, it's asking for a file name. So what is the actual name of the file I'm about to open? Well, let's just call it hello.txt. Okay, in quotes, so it's a string. Press the comma again, and we need to select what mode. Now, I'm teaching you how to write to files. Okay, so let's just use open mode output. And you'll see right here it says file opened for write access. So it's pretty straightforward. And we're going to use that mode. All right. So what I've effectively done is I've told Visual Basic I want you to open up a file called hello.txt for writing, and we're going to call it number 1. So for the rest of the program, I'm never ever going to refer to it as hello.txt. I'm going to refer to it as 1. Okay, let's have a look at println. He's complaining a little bit. Println asks you for the file number. What's the file number? Well, it's right there, 1. And then it asks you for output. Okay, this one can be any number of things, but let's just for the moment go hello world. So what's that line of code there saying? Well, it's going to say I'm printing a line to file 1, and it's going to print hello world. All right, and then file close. What do I want to close? Well, I want to close file 1. Okay, so open, do stuff, and close. All right, if I press play, it flashes in front of me because I haven't got any write lines or read lines. Okay, and effectively what we need to do is describe this process. What the hell is going on and how it works. So effectively, what Visual Basic has done is it's looking for a file called hello.txt. Now, because I've chosen the output mode, it's a bit special. What it does is if this hello file does not exist, Windows creates it. All right, so if it can't find hello.txt, it will create a brand new file for you ready to save things into. However, if it does find the file hello.txt, it deletes it and creates a fresh one. So beware if you're using output mode. I'll show you another mode if you want to just add on to existing files. Because right now, if hello.txt is found by Windows, it is deleted, and then a new one is created. All right, so second part, where the hell do we find this hello.txt file? Well, I think the easiest way to do something is generally, if you just have the file name, it's going to save it to what's called your working directory. And I hope some people know what I'm talking about. What's my working directory? Well, let's go to our project folder. Mine, I've saved to documents. So 2013, projects, there's writing files. So let's go inside that, ignore the poo folder. Let's go inside here. Now our working folder is inside debug. And there's hello.txt. Why doesn't it display .txt? It's because my Windows settings have turned .txt off. All right. So you'll see over here it says text document. Now if I open it up, our print line has worked just perfectly. Now if I change this quickly, poodles, and in fact I'm going to do a couple of print lines now. Let's do 3 of them. Why not? And I'm going to run this program again. opened and closed, so it's created the file, printed the data, closed it off. Let's have a look inside hello again. Poodles are awesome. This is me writing. Notice there's no hello world anymore. Like I said before, if it finds that file, deletes it, and recreates it. Now, why the heck is hello.txt being created here? Well, that's our program. That right there, writing files, is our executable program. And if you don't specify an absolute path, and an absolute path might look like something like this. It's referring to an exact position inside my computer. All right, and in fact, if I run this, it should create hello.txt on my desktop, and I should be able to find it. I hope. Hope there's no issues with that. Didn't crash. Let's have a look. There it is. Hello. And it's got all that stuff inside of it. So that's an absolute file path. Now, that's actually bad practice to use an absolute file path. And the reason I say it's bad practice is because if somebody else logs onto the computer, and they don't have access to my desktop, it's going to give them an error saying access is denied. Okay, if I go to another computer where you don't log on as a user on a network at all, okay, if this does not exist or they don't have access to it, you're going to get access is denied or path not found. So this is what you call a relative file path. All right, and a relative file path is relative to our executable file. If you don't specify a path, it's going to sit alongside your exe file. All right. If I specify, I wonder if this is going to work, .. Ooh, I think it may have worked. It puts it in the previous folder. All right. So it's relative to where our executable file is. Okay? And it's just a very quick example. Now, let's change this program up. I want the user to be able to write stuff into our file. So we're going to write stuff into a file until they type in, let's say, the word stop. All right, so we're going to loop until user enters stop. All right, I'll get rid of a couple of these print lines. And let's declare a variable dim input as string, if I can spell, while input to upper does not equal stop. Then first of all, let's give them a nice little message. I hate not giving them a pretty little message. Enter a sentence. Stop to stop. That makes a whole lot of sense, doesn't it? And then we'll do input is a read line because we want to read it. Now, if input does not equal to upper does not equal stop, then print line. Now, we don't want to print line poodles are awesome. Let's print line whatever they typed in. Input. There shouldn't be anything wrong with that. So let's just put an equals empty there just to make sure no errors occur. Open the file. While they don't enter stop, ask them for another sentence. If it's not stop, we jam it inside our file called hello. All right, so let's press play. Poodles are awesome. Something else. Dude. Stop. Woo! Stop the program. Let's go have a look at our text file. Forget that one. I'm going to delete him. It should be this one. Poodles are awesome. Something else, dude. There you go. Nice interactive file writing program. Okay, so that's just some easy, quick way to write stuff into a text file. There's a couple of issues you might run into when you're working with writing to files, and you're going to have to be able to combat them. The first issue is, let's say I open this text file, and then I run my program. Bugger. I was hoping it would cause an error. There we go. I can get the error through Notepad at least. Because I've opened the file in Visual Basic, no other program is allowed to open that file. It's essentially locked to VB.NET, or my writing files program. So this is what would happen if I forgot to close the file. Let's do that. Let's get rid of file close for a second. That's not going to happen anymore. Let's run our program a little bit. Something to do. blah, 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 stop. And let's see if it's going to cause any errors. Let's see if I can open it. Damn you, Visual Basic. It's fixing my errors for me. Bah. Apologies, everyone. I was hoping to cause an error for you, but it didn't want to do it. Alright, so that's effectively the basics of right lining. So you need to remember three commands primarily. File open, print line, and file close. Now there are heaps and heaps of different ways that you can work, where you can write to files. However, I find this the easiest and probably the most effective way to write to files to start with. Later on, you can use what's called file streams, and you can use binary serialization and heaps of different other things. But right now, a file open and a file close is all you need if this is all you're going to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to make up a new project for reading files, and then we're going to have a look at some of the issues, some of the things you can do, and how to stitch it all together. Okay, so I'll see you soon. I'm going to pause for the moment. Hey everybody, and welcome back. I've set up a little project. I've put down our process again with 1, 2, and 3, and let's get right into it. Let's say we have a file. So I'm going to quickly jump to my new project called Reading Files. All right, let's go inside that debug folder and let's create our own file. So if we just create a quick text file, let's call this one hello. Now be very careful. A lot of people I find fall into a trap right here. Because this file, I want to read it as hello.txt, and if I call it hello.txt, effectively what I've just called that file is actually hello.text.text. Alright, well, how can I prove that to you? I hopefully can, but I'm here at work, so it might not let me. Let's take this setting off, hide extensions for known file types. I hate that setting. There it is, hello.text.text. And I find a lot of people fall into this trap early on, is they don't know that by default Windows hides those file extensions. Thankfully Windows 8 doesn't, Windows 7 does. So I'm going to quickly rename this file back to hello.txt, and we'll go from there. Give you a quick explanation. What is that .txt? If you don't know it, listen to me now. If you do know it, skip ahead a little bit. Okay, I want to explain this. In a Windows operating system, this comes from DOS, back in the old days. It's known as a file extension, and it generally consisted of 3 letters after a dot. And what it is it's 3 letters to distinguish that file and tell you what program opens it up. So what do I mean by that? Well, .txt is a text document, and the reason Windows knows that is because Notepad has been set up to open all .txt files. Now, if I can be a bit of a prick here actually, I can rename this file extension. I can call it MP3. Yep, sure. And all of a sudden, Windows recognizes it as an MP3 file or an audio file. That's interesting, isn't it? Now, if I try to play it, nothing happens. It actually just will tell me I'm an idiot, basically. If it hurries up and tells me I'm an idiot. No, it's taking too long. I'm bored. Go away, VLC. And so, the file extension isn't anything special. If I change it to .doc, D-O-C, oh, far out, go away, VLC. Then it's going to be recognized by Microsoft Word. Open that up, and it's going to be blank because there's nothing inside my file. So essentially, the extension is something you can almost make it up if you really want. You can call it .dns files and .psa files or whatever. It doesn't matter. Okay? The file extension is just for Windows so that we can double click on it and Windows automatically knows what program to open it inside of. Okay, file extension talk over and done with. If it still doesn't make sense to you, please have a read about it on the web because it's probably a good thing to know as a programmer. In fact, it is a thing you should know as a programmer. So let's have a look at our program. We're going to read from this file hello.txt. I'm going to quickly press start so that Visual Studio makes my exe file. So just you can see that my exe file resides next to my hello.txt file. So that means I can use a relative file path. So what do I mean by that? Let's go file open, And let's choose number 1. I'm going to replace that in a second with something else. And the relative file path, hello.txt. And what open mode do we use? We don't use output because that's used for writing. We actually use input, which is used for reading. Now, interesting fact, if you try to use a print line, while you're in input mode, let's file close quickly, then you will get an error. Bad file mode, which means we're trying to write to a file, but we promised Windows that we would only read from it. You can do both, not a good idea. Okay, what do we use for that then? Well, the command we use to read from a file is line input. Well, it's the easiest one I find. Now, it only asks for a file number. Now, this is the interesting part. How the hell does it work? Okay, let me just leave that line of code there. And let's go back to our folder and put something inside hello.txt. Okay, so I'm just going to go first line, second line, third line, something line. And I'm just going to save that one. Alright, so what actually happens is when you open a file up for reading, you effectively, everyone can see that little flashing man on the in front of my word first, and it's known as the cursor or the text cursor. Effectively, what Visual Basic does is it will put a virtual cursor in my file. Now, this command line input reads an entire line of text until it hits the end of that line and then jumps down to the next one. So what I mean by that is if I run this command, Visual Basic will read first line, hit the end of the line, and then it will jump down to here and wait for the next command. Okay, so to get every line of this file, I would have to do 4 line inputs. Alright, so let's just get line input working first. Now, I've saved that. I'll close it so we don't get any errors. And what can we do with this? Well, I like to put it inside a temporary variable. And then we can do whatever we want with it. Really, what are we going to do? Well, we're just going to print it to the screen with a write line. Alright, so this is for future reference only, people. So right now, I'm going to go console.writeLine. So it's going to grab a line from file 1 and then print it to the screen. And let's put a read line down the bottom, otherwise it's going to disappear on me. Woo! I'm breaking stuff. Let's try it out. First line. So how do we get the next 3 lines? Well, a lot of people I see do this. Unfortunately, that doesn't make sense because what that number is not the line that you're reading. It's actually the file number. And the file number never changes from number 1. So what if we run the command a second time? What if we run it 2 more times? What if we run it 5 times? And there we go. There's another error. There's probably the first error that you're going to get when you're working with text files or files in general is you've read everything the file contains or has to say and you're trying to go past the end of it. Now, in every single file in Windows, it has a special marker at the end of the file which we can't see as programmers or as users, but Windows can see it because it needs some special marker to indicate this is the end of my file, and it's known as the end of file marker. If you try to go past that, the Windows operating system raises an error, and I'm not going to go into why that happens, just know that it does. Okay, I'd have to go into how hard drives work, unfortunately, if I was going to explain it. So there's only 4 lines in my file, and at the end of that 4th line, there was an end of file marker. And I've tried to read a 5th line, which is past the end of file. Now that's the tough part, because we're not always going to know how many lines are in our file, are we? So then we need some way of being able to read that end of file symbol. And beautifully, there is something that's set up for that. So I'm just going to get rid of these 4 input lines, and I'm going to utilize just this one line of code. So effectively, what's going to happen is it's going to loop through every single line that's available in my file. And it will also help me with this kind of error. What I'm going to do I'm just going to do this temporarily. I'm going to cut the contents of this text file so there's no lines in this file and try to run my program. So I get, just with one command, I can crash. Okay, and that's not a good thing. If you give that to your friends and your program just crashes, they're going to think you're a crap programmer. So with this little piece of code, it doesn't matter if there's 0 lines or 500 lines. It's going to read every single one it can. Okay, so while we are not at the end of file, which file? Well, file number 1, read one line at a time. Okay, I'm going to go back and put those lines back in. Save, minimize, play, and there you go. All 4 lines, and I've got that with 3 lines of code. I could have 500 lines, and Visual Basic's just going to read 500 lines and put them out on the screen for me. All right. Now, before we go, there is 2 more things I want to show you. The first one is I talked about how do you combat knowing which file number to use. Well, really, if you've only got one file open at a time, you should be able to get away with just using the number 1. Or perhaps you like the number 1000. I don't care. All right, and the computer doesn't care. Just use that number consistently. What if you're going to have 4 files open at the same time or different times and you're not sure which number to use? Well, you can actually get away with a nice little piece of code. We're going to dim a variable and we're going to call it file num as an integer. All right, and what we're going to do, instead of using 1 all the time, we're going to use file num. Now, we can't just use file num at the moment because every variable or every integer starts with the number 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to assign file num the first free file number. So it returns an integer value that represents the next file number available. And instead of 1, as I said, I'm putting file num. Now, chances are, when this line of code runs, number 1 is going to be my free file number, but that doesn't matter. Okay, so what I want you to do is have a go at that, test the program, make sure it still reads all of your text, and I'm going to show you the next and the last thing that we're going to do about files, and I'm going to go back to my writing files project for that. Okay, so now I'm back in my writing files project. I'm just going to have a look at one last way that we can work with files, and this has to do primarily with this open mode. Now, we talked about the output mode, where if the file doesn't exist, one gets created for you, okay? If the file does exist, it gets wiped, and then we start fresh. So what if we actually didn't want to do that? What if we had a file there? Okay, let me just quickly open up the folder. Okay, there's our file. Let's say for whatever reason, we don't want to lose these contents. We actually just want to add to the bottom of this file. And a great example of that would be in Microsoft Word. When you open up a document and add to it, you don't want to delete what you originally had and start fresh every single time. You want to add to it. And another word for add is append. Okay, and there is actually a third open mode that we're going to cover today. Right there. There is file open mode append. All right, and what that's going to do is it's going to seek out that hello.txt file. It won't delete anything about that file, and it'll start adding to the bottom of the file. So keeping in mind, this is currently our hello.txt file. I'm going to run this program, add a few more things to it. One more line, another line, stuff, why not, end of file, and then I'll stop. Remembering that we just changed that open mode from output to append. So that's what it used to look like. Let's have a look at it now. And you'll see that it's simply added on to the bottom of the file, which works perfectly, which is great. And realistically, it's up to you. You have to figure out which open mode you're going to use. Do you want to start from scratch? Do you want to add to the bottom of it? Or do you want to read from it? Those are your 3 modes. You write, append, or read. They're the main ones. Before we go, I'm going to show you one last little thing that you'll probably run into a lot of times. If you try to open a file for reading or open a file for appending, it must exist. If the file does not exist, Windows will raise a file not found runtime error. So what I mean by that, I'm going to delete my hello file that's been created, and I'm going to press play because I'm going to try and open this hello file for appending. And I think it's created one for me. It has. Damn it. Okay, another time where I'm not hitting the errors that I want to get. Sorry everybody, let's go to the other project instead. Let's go to reading files. Alright, and I'm going to go to that folder and delete his file. Okay, at least you know now that Append creates one for you anyway. I do, I just learned something myself. There's the error I was looking for, could not find file, and it gives me the full address. Alright, so how do we avoid something like this? Well really, how do we avoid trying to open a file which doesn't exist? First of all, you should check if the file even exists in the first place. And it's very, very simple. There's a built-in function for that. We just simply go if io.file.exists. It's just a matter of learning io.file.exists. Okay, what are we checking what exists? Well, we're looking for hello.txt. If the file exists, then do the code. And we can put an else here and just do a quick little write line and say could not find file hello.txt. Right. So if the file exists, then open it up, read the information, close it up. Okay. If it doesn't exist, then we just write the message could not find file. So let's just give it a quick go. I haven't changed anything. Straight off the bat, could not find file. There we go. So I hope you enjoyed these video series, everybody. I'm not stopping them, but this is the last of my introductory videos to VB.NET 2013. And I'm moving on to making a mini project using all the different skills that I have covered in the next playlist series. And then finally, after that, I'm going to move on to GUI-based programming. So hopefully you're good working with files, everybody. I'll see you later. Happy programming until then.